Welcome, Oscar. Thank you for being here with us today. I'm sorry for the delay. We started a little bit late. Oscar is based in Montevideo, Uruguay. He's well known in the technology and internet field in Latin America. He's the leader of ACNIC, which is our regional internet registry. It has a very important role in distributing IP addresses and also as regards training with internet access providers and specialists all over the region. There was a very interesting meeting in Santa Cruz de la Sierra, Bolivia. It was kind of a hybrid meeting. It was very successful. And it was a meeting that in which that technology people from Latin America participated. Thank you, Oscar, for being with us. We have 60 participants in the room from different countries in Latin America and, of course, Argentina. And we have a lot of online participants from not only Latin America, but also from Africa, Asia, North America, and Europe. Welcome, Oscar, and now I'm going to give you the floor so that you can tell us a little bit about digital transformation in Latin America and other data that you want to share. I'm going to suggest that you visit the ACNIC website. It is in 3 languages, and it has a lot of courses that you can take. And now you have the floor, Oscar. Welcome. Thank you, Olga and Adrian, for the invitation, and congratulations on the incredible work that you have been doing in the School on Internet Governance. I'm going to share my presentation. Can you tell me if you can see it? Can you see it? Not yet. Okay, now we can. Today I'm going to talk about the role of internet in the digital transformation in Latin America. For many of you, the answer is obvious, or the role seems to be obvious. Of course, it's an important role that internet has in our transformation or the transformation of our processes, not only for the economic productivity, but also for different processes that are important in the development of our communities, such as in the field of education and communication. Not necessarily from the business point of view, but also I'm going to show you or give you a deep perspective as regards the importance of internet. So let's start with this journey about the relevance of internet in the digital transformation. Let me tell you a little bit about my sponsors. I am the executive director of LACNIC, which is a non-for-profit organization that was created 20 years ago with the aim of managing the resources of internet, such as IP addresses. There are only 5 of these institutions in the world. The one in Latin America and the Caribbean is in Montevideo, Uruguay. We have more than 20,000 members, which are the customers that we offer the IP addresses. And our scope of action is the ACNIC extended community, which is not only our members, but also different organizations and agencies that work with us. For example, in this kind of forums that Olga was mentioning, like the one in Santa Cruz de la Sierra, Bolivia. And what we do is to develop this community in connection to technical aspects and technical topics. If you ever visit Montevideo, we're going to welcome you. And now let me talk about the topic for today, which we believe has been the catalyzer in the recent digital transformation that we have seen. The world has been dramatically advancing in the last 30 months as regards digitalization. We haven't experienced this kind of radical change before as regards education, productive processes, and some believe that the catalyzer was the COVID pandemic. But here, it is taken for granted that everything else was already there, that everything that allowed this transformation was already there, and that the only new thing was this virus that we were facing. We know that there have been pandemics in the past and other similar situations throughout the history of humanity, and no technological changes were brought about by that. So let's think a little bit about the past, and let's think about what could have happened if this pandemic, took place in another time and another moment as regards the development of internet. Let's start at the beginning of the 80s. We had only few countries, developed countries, that were making efforts to build a network, which was not the same network. There were different networks in Japan, Europe, the US, to have connectivity. We wouldn't even talk about internet at the time. We talked about different networks with the aim of connecting computers, but within countries and not all over the world. Some of the countries were working in the TCP/IP protocol, which was defined and adopted in 1981 by this man that is in this slide. He was the one that defined this protocol, which is the base of internet today. But only a few countries were part of this effort and started connecting. And this was with asynchronous connectivity apps. If you wrote something, maybe a couple of days later, somebody could read it. And there were some kind of real-time apps in order to have some kind of communication, but it was based on limited texts. We cannot even talk about hypertext or videos. So all this scenario was really new as regards interconnectivity, so we couldn't talk about the 80s internet or networks being able to support a pandemic. And this was exactly what the technical community allowed to happen. This new protocol and the possibility of having a single internet. We needed a single internet in the 80s because with these efforts, it was not possible to enable adopting this technology facing a pandemic because we were not talking about the same internet. So by introducing the TCP/IP, this single language that is used by different networks, this became a possibility. So the idea was not that all the networks were going to be the same, but that there was going to be connectivity of different networks through a single mechanism, which was TCP/IP. If we move forward 15 years into the future to the mid 90s, we can see that some developed countries already had internet, and some countries were interconnected through that internet. These were not the same networks. Each country had different technologies, but there was a common interconnectivity and they were able to communicate. In our region, only few countries had a solid internet. Some universities, some researchers, and a few students. Students, in order to have access to resources that had the possibility of connecting to internet, were only a few, and so it was a scarce resource, not only in the world, but specifically in our region. And apps were text apps, but we started seeing hyperlinks and hypertext. We could not only see text, but also we were able to see images, which was something that was limited by technology in the past. So this kind of internet wouldn't have been able to support a pandemic. Not even in developed countries, a productive process could have taken place. Maybe something that had to do with entertainment, but nothing solid enough. We already had a single internet now, but we needed something else. We needed internet that could be able to support a pandemic and to favor digital transformation. I'm sure that many of you know what I'm talking about, which is not specifically the pandemic, but let's continue with this journey that I'm taking. Let's move 15 years into the future. Once again, the world is ending a global economic crisis. The different economies are growing. And in Latin America, we are far away from surviving a pandemic. Although in the world, there's a lot of internet penetration. We have moved from several millions in the 90s to 2 billion people connected. Never before some kind of technology had developed this kind of growth. So 2 billion people connected using that technology was an extraordinary leap. But in Latin America, penetration was only 30%. Some countries had higher index, but some countries in Central America and the Caribbean had really low levels, lower than 10%. Developed countries, nevertheless, had this kind of mass internet, a single internet, but it was not ready yet. Countries could have been ready because penetration was over 50%, but that could have kept a kind of an economic activity level, but internet was not ready. What we needed was to have a network with the capacity to face the change that we had. It didn't also have the flexibility that the networks have today with all the different changes as regards traffic, specifically the type of traffic in the last few years. The other day I was taking the XPs in Argentina, and traffic grew from 1 gigabyte for seconds to 1,000 in the last years. We are talking of a 1,000-fold increase. But we need to consider this 1 to 1,000 growth in 10 years. So the growth capacity of the networks has been incredible. At the world level, this was less dramatic because there was already a huge video penetration in some countries. But traffic at the global level grew 30 times in these last 10 years. So we are talking about a strong growth. If we think about the links that were forecasted in 2010, for 2020, this is not enough. So the investment that we need to do as regards this industry and technology, planning, the adoption of protocols and mechanisms to take advantage of technology is incredible. We didn't have this kind of flexibility in the networks in order to face this kind of pandemic. So we needed an additional element. So going back to my first question, which was the great catalyzer of the recent digital transformation? If it wasn't the pandemic, which was the catalyzer? I believe that it was a single, scalable, adaptable, and flexible internet. I'm going to mention some data as regards this flexibility, scalability, and adaptability. Of course, internet is a single one, except for some exceptions in the country, such as China, which is clearly totally different. But in the rest of the cases, it's a single internet with these features that I was mentioning. The pandemic could have been worse if it took place in another time. As regards the development of internet, it could have brought a bigger gap, and some countries could have had a better capability and a different answer towards this. So let's see some of the features that I was mentioning. First of all, I was talking about scalability. There is no technology that had shown a greater degree of scalability as the internet. We moved from 0 to more than 4 billion users and 10 billion devices. We are talking about billions of users and devices connected and more than 70,000 different networks. This is incredible for any quantitative aspect. We have moved from this kind of connectivity because we need this, and billions of devices connected is incredible. It is the same technology. And you can see that it has evolved. This has to do with scalability. Let's talk about flexibility. When these first protocols were developed, we didn't know a lot about mobile networks. Probably the idea of satellite networks was not very clear, or wireless networks, but the truth is that internet has shown the flexibility by being capable of keeping the interconnectivity of the different networks and devices despite the differences between them. In the Bolivia meeting, we had a meeting in Colombia in May, and we were also mentioning, or one person from GCMA Avarmovics, he lives in Argentina, he was talking about the convergence of 4G with the IP networks. It is a 4G technology that 40 years ago was not even thought about. So it is incredible that after 40 years, that kind of technology that is the base for connectivity is becoming traffic based on these protocols that were developed in the 80s and which are the base of internet. So this is an important element for the success of internet and for the internet capabilities during the pandemic. Another important aspect of the success of internet is the adaptability. During the last 50 years, it has had a lot of changes. It's not a monolithic thing. You know that internet is a group of blocks. For example, think about Legos that you can be placed in different blocks. And then if you need to change one, there's going to be an impact on what you are building, but it remains a robust construction because it is a block that is being updated. So in the last years, hundreds of protocols have been updated that are very important for internet. You may have heard about some of them recently, for example, DNS and DNSC. DNS was created in 1984 and internet was developed in the 70s. So to give you an idea of this, DNSC was recently adopted and IPv6 was developed in the mid-90s when internet was already a success and they had to think about a permanent protocol for this network. Some other elements that are important during the pandemic have to do with resilience. Internet was able to keep productive and educational processes because of the capacity that it had to face the impacts in growth, not only as regards security, but also as regards development and growth. In the last 10 years, we have seen different kind of developments, but in this last, during the pandemic, this took place in only a few days. It was a 20-30% on average, but in some networks it was 70, 80, and in some cases 100% growth. And this was the standard in many of the links and networks in the internet, and it was something that shows how resilient internet is.
It is clear what the role of internet is for digital transformation in Argentina and across the world. However, if we wonder what is the role of the internet in the digital transformation in our region, I am fully convinced that it is the cornerstone for digital transformation. As I said at the beginning, we learn to think of the internet when we consider business processes, even though they are traditional or whatever, or however traditional they may be, because we have realities in the region that are far from digital transformation and they are far from digital transformation be a real thing. For example, merchants in Bolivia and La Paz, they don't require digital transformation. Merchants in the grocery stores in Mexico are not interested in digital transformation. They are not going to overcome any challenges, although they may have one. The internet is far from their reality. Of the rest of them, the internet for all are posing challenges, and the internet is going to be that cornerstone that drives convergence or this way of doing business or this way of educating or relating to one another. as long as we can maintain and protect the internet. Because as you can see, it's not the internet that is going to allow the digital transformation. What is going to allow this digital transformation or having a better quality of life in our society is to maintain the internet with all these features at an appropriate level of service. The issue is that we take for granted that the internet is always going to be there and has been there. But this is not the case. It has not been as it is today, and it's not going to be the case in the future. And internet depends on people. So if we conceive the internet as this immaculate mirror that is perfect, spotless, that is here to stay or that arrives here to endure the pandemic. However, due to the greed that we have in the world, and because we have many corporations or some corporations that have endless ambitions, or that there are governments that they do not like a few things that they see over the internet, that could be just like this mirror. If there's a reflection that they see detrimental to their own government, they will see, or they will have to understand that this is a reflection of society. Even the spotless mirror are going to reflect the dirt worse than the present or the incumbent situation. It's not the problem or the issue of the mirror, the problem of the internet that we may have these ambitious or greedy corporations or governments that they fear the information over the internet, or authoritarian government that they intend to protect their power or authority. Authority is okay, the power is another thing. So sometimes, as a weapon, they argue that rely on over-regulation, so they can cover this part of the mirror to hide the reality of society. But what we need to solve is how this happens in real terms, or why this greed in corporations or organizations, and how they can limit or the power of these companies, or how can we make sure to provide the necessary entertainment over the internet for final users. So instead of asking what is the role of the internet in digital transformation, we should ask ourselves of what is our key role in order to maintain internet in the digital transformation in Latin America. So is going to become relevant because in the future we need to be aware of may what some governments or corporations may do will have an impact on the internet and in our futures. And in the near future or in the long term, we should be aware of the attacks on the internet integrity, on its resilience, because these attacks are disguised as adequate measures or addressing adequate issues, but generally the measures may not be adequate. They intend to uh, resolve human traffic, child abuse, terrorist acts. However, those measures will impact the internet directly. Some days ago, they hacked the Secretariat of Mexico and some defense ministries in the region. So the immediate action is to pass legislation to prevent hackers from committing further crimes. But this is not going to resolve the issue. is going to affect the rest of transactions, legitimate transactions, and hackers. I continue hackers are hacking. So there should be better interconnection at the interagency level to pay license, to pay renewal of equipment or software renewals, or to have better access of information society, and not to affect or attack the internet that is operational as we speak. It's not attacking equipment or serious initiatives, like, for example, in the case of China or corporations, in order to break the basic paradigms or principles that I mentioned. It may be a new law, a new social network. I mean, the sky is the limit. Ambitions have no limit. So, if you want to be aware of the fundamentals of the internet in order to keep digital transformation going, you can resort to the Epinix information or LACNIC. We produced a study a few months ago where we discuss in depth all these topics, and I'm sure they are going to be interest of you, so you can advocate the internet in the next few months or in the near future. I would like to acknowledge LACNIC for your participation and for the role it plays to keep a safe and stable open internet in Latin America, and for co-sponsoring this event that allow us to have a hybrid or to hold this hybrid event. It's more complex, or it's more difficult to hold a hybrid event rather than a face-to-face or an online event. And thanks to LACNIC, we were able to organize this and to provide housing or accommodation and lunches or coffee breaks to this, the students in the audience. I have a question here, something about intergovernmental coordination. That is the challenge, the largest challenge that governments may face. We believe that governments are monolithical, but we're far from being monolithical. And one interesting thing that you mentioned is to protect infrastructure, to have upgraded license or upgraded or updated equipment, or a cyber security hygiene. It's very difficult to find this in government because in Latin America there's always budgetary restraints, other priorities. And when there's a specialist that requires an upgrade of a license or some piece of equipment to have a strong and resilient infrastructure, the investment is not made. So we should raise awareness in administrations, in governments, in order to mitigate these attacks, because this is what we have experienced in in the public sector. Are there any questions for Oscar? Are there any questions here? I know people are hungry because lunch is coming up. Could you introduce yourself? Yes, my name is Carolina Valenzuela. I come from Chile, Nick, Chile, and I would like to ask Oscar a question because I'm very interested in what ubiquitous internet is. Could you give us some guidelines for where to resort to information on the ubiquitous internet? Sure, Carolina. When I was addressing ubiquitous, I was speaking of access. Access for the whole population. One example that illustrates this is the internet dating back to the 80s. It was not ubiquitous at that time, not even in the 90s. At the very beginning of the 2000 was not ubiquitous either. It's that capacity that every country should have so that any individual that would like to have access to the internet may get it. Whether it is transactions, social networking, education, that is ubiquitousness. It's not precisely being in or reaching remote places, we're far from having that capability. And Olga would like to make another comment because we had the chance to educate some governments through the Amparo scheme or program is to create CSEX at the institutional level or at the national one. Interestingly enough, the human factor plays a key role. We may think that cybersecurity depends on a large investment in terms of technology, but this is not the case. Human coordination, trust, relations, mechanisms, and formal procedures for a given community or for a given communication are more transcendental than mere technology. My name is Carolina Medina Serie from Bolivia. Great pleasure to hear from you. And I would like to ask you a question in connection with what you said about the internet in Latin America. So, what are the steps or measures that you're considering, like for ransomware? What is your experience in ransomware in Latin America? Are you promoting policies? Is there a cooperation for countries to safeguard from ransomware? What are the measures taken by LACNIC? Thank you, Carolina. As LACNIC, we play a key role with the members or with the carriers, the internet carriers that is pretty limited. The responsibility that we may have is limited to the service contract. So we may not be binding something that is out of scope of the IP Internet Services contract. So if there's a government that requires an ISP to implement cryptography for a certain service, we may not do so. We may not require ISPs to do something because our role is limited to internet service provide or provision. Despite that, our role played in the region facilitates having access to the ISPs and with the states and with some law enforcement agencies. Priority is placed upon education, given the relevance of these elements over the internet in connection with IP blocking, what may do, what can be done, what is the ideal thing when regulators or legislators may block the internet to raise awareness of the effects or the impact that this may have, or with the Amparo program to develop certain learning skills in order to tackle these challenges. I mean, there's no defense mechanism against ransomware. Mostly, most of the defense lies in the individual, in each of the members that work in organization. However, many resources should be allocated to training and education, these topics in general. Unfortunately, this is one of the topics that least priority is given to because there are other priorities. So priority is generally not placed upon this topic. My name is Lorenzo Martinez from the Dominican Republic. Thank you, Oscar. Very interesting talk, but along these lines, as you have explained, I know that the Amparo program intends to strengthen skills, but what happens with the cyber hygiene like nest or each one with different approaches? How do we borrow elements in order to reduce the cyber hygiene that may touch upon or affect the final users, not only the state, but also the private state or the final user or the public state or the public sector that is the weakest link in the chain, as you have well explained. In line with collaboration skill creation at the national level in order to facilitate the discussion of these topics, we should have an inward looking approach, address international standard that could be JIS, ISO 27000, SOC, or any other standard that could identify the processes in information security and accordingly may offer treatment or processes for that procedure. This is supplementary because on the one hand we have the establishment of that SEC and depends on the collaboration of organizations that is always necessary, is always needed for national strategies and internally because it's not me being the weakest link in the chain as an individual, but it requires a national or an organizational strategy coordination. Thank you very much, Oscar. Very, thank you very much for participating. Greetings from Oscar and from Adrian. A round of applause for Oscar. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for participating and for taking part in this conference. We will see you in other conferences that are going to be held across the world.